this is a group of people that are all pithily broadband ninjas and policy ninjas in their own right, dedicated to the needs and issues and priorities of tribal communities, native communities, and we'll answer your call anytime, day, night, middle of the night. We'll step up on various things, no matter what the topic is, or reach into their Rolodexes of similarly good people. And it's just a real honor to be here.
And I will just, Jeff and I have known each other for 22 years now, 2 times at the FCC and now at AIM.
Yeah, I think we've all known each other for at least more than 15 years. Yeah. For sure. Sasha's the real radical, though. You don't know.
Sasha's the one that brings us into groups, and then Sasha gets thrown out of the group.
This video was created by Waskawiwin. Waskawiwin collaborates with Indian Country to empower tribes to build and manage their own communications needs.
All right, to start with, I'm going to open with a broad question. I'd love each of you to think about it. We've talked a lot about how this particular moment in tribal broadband feels really decisive. There's a whole bunch of resources, and it feels like there's genuine attention being paid to the issue. If you reflect back in like the 15, 20, 25 years you've been working on these issues, what do you think has been really pivotal in making this moment possible? That could be technology, that could be policy, that could just be how well Indian Country has advocated for itself. But what would you say has been a really serious contributing factor to making this moment possible? Whoever wants to go first.
Well, let's do a brief start to that, and that's when the first time the 4 of us got in the same room. But I think the world was in trouble when that happened.
Yeah. Oh, it's trouble.
But that, that's the start of this. Go ahead.
I mean, it's the long slog too, right? I mean, this is the culmination of incredible work by a huge array of people inching the ball forward for years or decades, and this serendipitous moment where, through a confluence of being able to move very quickly, we were able to get legislative language written to create a pot of money specifically for tribal authorities. And that is like, we took advantage of something because we were well positioned for that, but we couldn't have planned out that this was going to be the month or the year. But if it was 5 years from now, we would still be here, except that Irene would have been like, we've been working together for 25 years. To me, that's really important. There's a core of people that have been working on this for so long.
And I think one of the unique circumstances now was COVID. COVID-19 just shone a light on the disparity that everybody in this room has known about for years, but that wasn't generally known, or folks weren't listening and paying attention. So I think it is that unique point in time where the advocacy that's been going on for years and years and years is paying off. People are listening, and there is money, there is funding that is finally coming to Indian Country.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's an element of so many other things having been tried and succeeded to a certain level. There are so many different policy proposals, so many different pilot programs, subsidies, licensing mechanisms, all sorts of different things that have worked to one degree or another everywhere, but there hasn't been like this, perfect storm, confluence, serendipity. I do believe also it's certain individuals being in certain places and hanging in, having this long-range view. And maybe that's a lesson for everybody in here, is that you don't always have the bat in your hand. Revati and I were just talking about this. You don't always have the bat in your hand, but you have to be ready with what you know to be true. So the concept of a tribal broadband fund has been on paper in Matt and my committee at NCAI for 12 years. A couple of folks, including one person who's very senior at the Department of Agriculture right now, advising the chair or the secretary on policy issues. Heather Dawn Thompson, she and I sat down when we got left out of the Stimulus Act. We tribes got left out. We wrote a concept about direct funding. And for a long time, a lot of the resolutions that have come as a result of that, a lot of the thinking about the mechanisms at the FCC or the particular platforms that do or don't work for community networking and various models. I'm proud to say when Deb Holland was elected to the House, she was my representative. She came in with an understanding of the need for broadband and created an opportunity, and her and Tom Cole, Chickasaw also in the House, both sides of the aisle, there were people that worked for them that started writing concepts well ahead of COVID, the prior Congress. But they knew that this was an issue, that sooner or later something, I always thought it was going to be a terrible fire, especially coming to Emory, because you watch the Weather Channel with such intent now. But I thought that there would be a fire that would come and it would take out, that would severely affect a few tribes, and then a big light would be shining on the no broadband. I had no idea there would be a worldwide pandemic, but yeah. And then the pandemic came, and there were these things, these concepts that had been on paper or already in legislation that very quickly could be implemented in the 5 days that they were writing a bill. But yeah, it's a result of having been here for this long. It's not an overnight success. This is a 22-year success.
To pick up on something that Matt touched upon, the first time that you all four got together in the room. So where was that? What were some of the spaces, like the Tribal Broadband Bootcamp, that were happening before, over these last 20 years, where you've been collaborating with each other?
That probably would have been at National Congress of American Indians.
Well, I remember where I met you first.
Yeah.
It was at the
Blocking the doorway.
And I remember where I met all three of you. I think the first time the four of us were together were, probably a similar panel at NCAI where all of us came together.
Or, let's see.
Was it in Minneapolis?
I don't know if Sascha was at NCI ever, but I'm trying to figure out if we've just interwoven you into that all along.
Yes, I've infected you.
Well, here's the thing.
So Sascha and I were on a panel in Minneapolis together, and I can't remember what event it was. It was a broadband community networking, and I kept hearing about this guy, Sascha. And when you think Sascha, I think this big beard, comrade Sascha. And I ended up on a panel with Sascha, and I'm like, wow, I really like what this guy has to say. It has a lot of applicative value in Indian country. And Matt had told me, you gotta meet up with Sascha, and I'm like, I think I'm on a panel with that dude. So I hear what he has to say, and I take like half of my comments and scrap them and try to riff off half of what he's saying. And then we ended up doing the Q&A, mostly as Q&A to the both of us. Like, let me ask you a question. All right, we'll get to you. We'll get to the audience. And then we go out into the audience afterwards, and we're sitting in the back, and he starts tweeting. I was like, who are you? Oh, you got a lot of followers? And he's like, yeah, I got a few followers. I was like, how many followers you guys? Like, I got about 145,000 followers. I was like, Jesus. Like, that's a lot of followers. But yeah, Matt, I met the first FCC outreach after I left the commission. Shana Greenberg Barehand held here in San Diego. And I'm late, I'm always late. And there's this great big Wookiee of a guy standing in the doorway.
Name Sascha, right?
Oh yeah. Oh, by the way, he's moose, squirrel, I'm buffalo. Although I'm slim, fast buffalo. A little slower. But I said, are you going in? Are you waiting? Are we waiting? What are you doing? And he was like, I don't know. I'm going to see. I don't know about what's going on here. We totally co-opted him, and he made me climb up towers. I made him learn how to write resolutions.
That was a point in history that changed the world. I learned how to write a resolution.
Like, we need a resolution on this. I said, no, mother, you need to learn how to write a resolution. Get your laptop and come down to the resolutions office.
I'm like, man, I thought I was just going to give the title and walk away.
And I got to know Sascha more, got to know you more in 2.5.
Yeah.
We were like the
Oh, yeah.
team that did the webinars and the workshops, trying to get the word out about 2.5.
Yeah, I think we talked to 185 tribes during that run.
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah, that was nice. That was good.
That was huge.
And
yeah.
you and I first met in 2000.
Oh my God. So Irene and I have both been office chiefs at the FCC, but her office was much larger and much more powerful than my office.
It's true.
It's true.
I had 50.
I had like 6.5. Yeah, some of them were too much. But
We actually had 9, but there was a lot of quarters and halves.
is this being recorded?
Yes, it is.
So, yeah, Irene was running the famous telecom access policy division, which regulates all of the universal service fund, which at the time was like $4.5 billion. It's now like $13 billion a year.
Around 12. Yeah,
Only 12 billion.
it's only 12. It's a lot of zeros.
And it was when the commission was first implementing the first proposals for Indian country. And I couldn't figure out why this this person who was born and raised in Washington, D.C., never lived anyplace else, had such an incredibly high cultural sensitivity to the needs of the tribe. And I never got a chance to meet your parents, but it must have been due to your parents, because when you left us, your replacement was not as...
She was not my choice.
Not as good. And it turned into a fight deluxe.
But then I continued. I went to USAC. I went to the Universal Service Administrative Company. They're the not-for-profit that administers that $13 billion under the guidance of the FCC. And I was in charge of Tribal Lifeline, which was the new program that had been created at the FCC. So I traveled with the FCC.
Yeah, we rolled out the Tribal Lifeline program in Indian country. There was a gentleman here from Navajo Nation.
Yes, but the presidents.
One of the spots where your council took after her like nobody's business on their own. I was like, wow, that's impressive. Yeah.
Irene, can I ask you to talk a little bit about how Tribal Lifeline came to be?
Sure. Well, the Lifeline program, for those of you who don't know, the FCC is an agency. It's an independent agency, and it doesn't have grant-making authority. But what it manages is the Universal Service Fund, and there are 4 different programs within that fund. One is schools and E-rate for schools and libraries, rural health care program, the corporate subsidy called either High Cost or Connect America Fund, and Lifeline. And Lifeline is the program. They all started out as telephone programs, helping to assist people to get affordable service. But Lifeline in particular focuses on low-income households and to give them an affordable cost for telephone and now broadband service. The FCC ran a number of hearings in Indian country and across the country, trying to get to the bottom of what is one of the problems. And one of the problems was a very low telephone penetration rate, and part of the major part of the problem there was affordability. So the FCC created, none of the programs have a specific tribal component other than Lifeline. So the regular Lifeline, the standard Lifeline program, provides a discount of $9.25 a month off the cost of service. But Tribal Lifeline provides an additional $25 per month off the cost of today broadband service. So the FCC decided that the need was so great that they would create a tribal-specific component of the Lifeline program.
Do you see the Affordable Connectivity Program or the EBB as sort of evolutions of Tribal Lifeline, or do you think of those as completely separate kind of creatures?
They're very similar. They have the same purpose, and the purpose is to provide affordable service by providing a subsidy, an amount of subsidy. I think the hope of many of us is that the FCC will learn from the experience of the EBB, which is the Emergency Broadband Benefit Program, and then more money came in, so they morphed it and changed it into, it's the same program, basically, with a few changes, the Affordable Connectivity Program. And there are more liberal aspects of the Affordable Connectivity Program in terms of eligibility, and the level of discount is higher. So I think what we're hoping, Lifeline hasn't been reformed in a number of years. It's been a great program. It's been under a lot of fire at different times because there have been nefarious providers who have gone out and tried to hawk free phones, not paying attention to the rules, and then everybody thinks the program's being fraught with waste, fraud, and abuse, which is not true. So hopefully the FCC
I told
will learn.
Chairman Pai what was going on, he didn't believe me.
Really? You didn't believe it?
Believe me.
That's shocking.
He got angry.
So this is a really important question, the ability to create a tribal-specific program. I think everybody here understands, but it's worth reiterating when this policy world that as American Indians, as citizens of tribal nations, we are not classified racially under the law. We're classified politically. So the FCC can, by law, have an Office of Native Affairs and Policy. And we chose that name very purposely. It was on my shoulders to choose this name, and it's because of our Hawaiian cousins and because of our Alaska cousins. It's very important to look at the potential future. So Lifeline is it's a key component. It's a program that's always under fire because it's seen as federal largesse, and it's seen as being, oh, well, you know, do people really need help paying for their bills? You know, how bad can it be out there at times? And sometimes it's really important for policymakers to get out of the ivory tower of Washington and experience the problem where it occurs. So when we were writing the tribal the Lifeline, the Enhanced Tribal Lands Lifeline program, we initially started by trying, the proposals at the time were to link it to other programs and other agencies. And over time it has grown to be a very valuable program for a number of carriers that have community-oriented values. The best personified by the tribal telcos, the 10 tribally owned, fully regulated, fully fledged tribally owned telcos in the United States. Underutilized. We actually had to enforce against carriers, non-tribal carriers, who weren't even doing the requisite outreach about the program on tribal land.
There were some that shockingly thought it would be good enough to advertise, to put an insert in the bill. Well, if you don't have phone service, you don't have a bill. Or they would bury it in the phone book, you know, page 400 of the phone book, you know. So the FCC took some action. They were never as strong as I had hoped they would be in cracking down.
Well, and said another way, what it does is it makes low-income consumers in Indian country middle-income consumers for their broadband dollars. So as you're looking at your models, think about building, I mean, we talk about it all the time, creating carrier-grade networks. I mean, Sascha's one of the biggest evangelists of this, open community, open technology, community-oriented networks, but are also carrier-grade, so that eventually, when the policy gets there, you will be in a position, and we're seeing that happening with EBB now. We just have to continue to advocate for this key component that feeds an economic need in our community that others don't understand, because our economics are so different from theirs.
You talked a little bit about helping draft some of the initial language that became Tribal Broadband Connectivity Program, that becomes the idea for money set aside specifically for tribal broadband. When the two of you were working on this issue at the FCC early 2000s, did you know that that was going to have to be the solution, or that was going to have to be like a main thrust of the solution? Or were you coming at it first from maybe there's other ways, maybe there's subsidies, maybe there's other ways to spur competition to get Indian country connected?
Oh, well, I knew it, but I was the only Indian guy working at the FCC. And I was just a senior attorney, I wasn't a bureau chief or office chief. But there were a number of people that knew that the commission needed to start with industry, that it was a new program. I was very eager to get to other places. It was very difficult I mean, you don't change the personality of an institution in a minute, it takes time. And the commission tried some good but obvious things early on. And to be fair, there were 2 field hearings. The commission canceled the 3rd field hearing. There was one in Albuquerque, there was one at Gila River. And about the problem of lack of telephone service. And the 2 major proposals coming out of that were a new method of coming to the FCC to get a certification to get subsidized by the federal government for a carrier already, an eligible telecommunications carrier, probably go up on the list of acronyms. And the second proposal was Tribal Lifeline. We did have other proposals at the time that, you know, didn't see the light of day because they weren't seen as being yet ripe. I wish we had been able to get to them, and so it's a whole history of woulda, coulda, shoulda, if. One of the things I still regret is not getting something into 700 megahertz into that rulemaking. I think we all got caught, watched that play happen. but, you know, 2.5 is an okay place to start with the tribal priority. But, yeah, I think the first thought was, I mean, the commission has got this relationship with industry, and the idea was, how can we pay for industry? The other major proposal at the time is one that's pretty important so that we don't replay the failure. It's called the Tribal Lands Bidding Credit, and it is paying for the build out on a on tribal lands in the form of a credit for spectrum auctions. And although there have been a few certified proposals, there's never been one that has ever gotten off the ground and received the credit since 2000. It's still in the regs, but a priority was much, you know, I think there were some pressing people who thought about it at the time. We advocated for it, but we just had to run those other traps first. That ability to run traps accelerated greatly when we got ONAP off the ground. And the great advantage at ONAP was having somebody inside the commission who knew how the commission run, other office chiefs that came to work with me in ONAP, and there were 3 other office chiefs that came to work in my office. And then having huge advocates on the outside like Sascha, who's always called it like it is at the commission, and allies like Matt on the Tribal Broadband, on the task force, so that we could very quickly move what we all knew to be reality into rulemaking. And what we couldn't move into rulemaking, we put into notices of inquiry. If you look at the 2011 notice of inquiry, the Native Nations Notice of Inquiry, you will see the Tribal Broadband Connectivity Fund as a proposal. So when it came time to talk to members of Congress about the concept, and there were new people coming to this, like, how do you know this is reality? How do you know? It's like, well, here's a rulemaking and comment. Here's the proposal. But it's more than that too. It's also, when I said these folks will answer the call when you call them, and please do, call all of us. Sascha gathered his whole team together over at New America Foundation when we were putting things into the record for the National Broadband Plan. Irene was working on the inside of the National Broadband Plan. Sascha got his whole team together, and in one night, and with a few libations and several laptops and Google Docs.
The gin-infused thunder snow.
That's right. It's the first time there was a storm going on outside. The first time I've ever heard the term thunder snow. And we were like, we got to do this. Put on AC/DC. Let's get this. Put about 47 recommendations. I never dreamed that I would be back at the commission working with you guys, implementing those same recommendations. I thought they were going to get some other slob to do that.
And I wasn't in that group, but I was on full text blast.
Oh, no, everybody was. That wasn't just the people in the room, it was a whole bunch of other folks. So a lot of these concepts are really tried and true. They're not perfect, they have to be meted out, especially with this new, with everybody coming to this community now, this circle that we're all involved in.
Well, and it's funny the way I ended up on the inside doing the tribal part of the National Broadband Plan. They were divvying up all the sections. And so there was schools, there was library, all the universal service pieces. So I got, okay, I'm schools, I'm lifeline. And then they said, well, there's a tribal section. Does anybody here know anything about tribes? And I'm thinking, well, yeah, sort of. So I ended up being the tribal point of contact for the National Broadband Plan. But to just go back to one issue when you were talking about in the early 2000s and Lifeline, you mentioned infrastructure build out. Lifeline is and always has been an affordability program. It is not an infrastructure deployment plan or program. There was mention in that first order when the program was created, it was like, well, wouldn't it be great if this also spurs infrastructure build out? Wouldn't that be a great side effect?
It's
well,
2 paragraphs.
Yeah.
It's 2 paragraphs.
Yeah, so yeah, sure, it's a, we hope. Fast forward 10, 12, whatever it was, 15 more years later, when Lifeline is being reformed, and the administration at the time, the chair at the time, wanted to restrict it to only rural areas. So tribal Lifeline would only be for rural tribes, and that carried over to the tribal. I will never call it the rural tribal priority window, it's the tribal priority window. But then it just kind of, the whole focus switched. It's like, well, we can do that because this program is an infrastructure deployment program. And we need infrastructure in rural America, on rural tribal lands. So we don't need to worry about tribal lands that are in quote-unquote urban areas or non-rural as defined by the FCC. And unfortunately, that did pass, that was adopted, but fortunately it was appealed to the DC Court of Appeals and was overturned.
The definition of tribal lands under the law is something that is born out of the reality of Indian country. It is our reservations, our allotments, it is all those places, dependent Indian communities, it is all those places where the federal government has a unique, special relationship, responsibility to the people and to the land. Wireless technology has been adopted by man faster than just about any other technology, including the bow and the wheel. So when it comes to spectrum, there's this concept that Indian country is sitting on the outside of a natural resource that should be ours. We should have a piece of this puzzle. And
Well, I think the law is pretty clear that if tribes haven't signed an agreement in mid-1800s to say that they give away their spectrum rights, that's still there. I mean, I know that's the radical position.
that's a toughie. To be honest, that's a tough one.
Well, but look what the Supreme Court did with Oklahoma just this past year. I think there's a play to be made. It's a long term. We'll be a little grayer before we have this conversation, but like, there's a lot of spectrum rights that I think are being actively infringed upon, that we've gotten ourselves into these path dependencies of saying like these frequencies are not available to the tribe, even though they're covering tribal land.
There's this other question that's going on in the Supreme Court right now about whether or not the state of Oklahoma was ever established the way it should have been, and certain of the reservations in Oklahoma having been disestablished. The family happens to have worked on, know a lot about that. But the question about whether or not we retain spectrum rights, it's kind of two paths. There is one that I do believe has merit looking into in terms of, well, wait a second, our treaty rights don't speak to this. There is a natural resource here that is valuable. It wasn't known to be valuable at the time, but oil wasn't going to be extracted out of the northern Alaska, and they didn't solve that problem until 1972, and that's how we end up with the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act. The other path is, let's find ways to get spectrum into tribal hands now. We could spend time in the courts, we could spend time in Congress, and look, I'm willing to do that. I do that all the time. I do think that it's very valid, things that have been written. I do think there's a solution in Congress to this. I'm not sure I would leave it up to the courts or just 9 people, but I do believe that there is a path to articulate that what isn't being utilized should revert, that the tribe should have a voice, that the federal government has a responsibility to be a backstop. It's called the Digital Reservations Act of 2020.
Right.
It was introduced as a bipartisan bill. It's seen as being radical, but when you're on the other side of a pandemic and you're looking at the 3rd year of children not getting an education, hey guys, what's radical? It's time to start thinking radically. Let's shake this up a bit. You used the term institutional racism. I saw in the proposals around all of these concepts, it's called the Spectrum Over Tribal Lands Rulemaking of 2011, and everybody here had a hand in it. A lot of folks in this community had a hand in surfacing all the issues. There are certain proposals, not just the tribal priority, but a use it or lose it, a negotiated negotiated secondary markets leasing. None of these really came to see the light of day because a lot of the industry folks said, well, what would tribes do with spectrum if they had it? They don't know what to do.
No, they didn't say it like that.
Yeah.
It was ugly.
It got a little ugly.
And it was on the record.
Yeah, so at the end of the day, I make, and you shouldn't make any apologies here. You want to, if somebody needs to be disagreed with, you want to disagree but not be disagreeable, but never lose vision of what, and the justifications for what your needs and your priorities are. So there's still a ton of spectrum out there that is not being utilized, that right now could be the solutions. We're left having to look at certain vendors, certain technologies, certain criteria, certain off the shelf. If we had Spectrum, see it as this, it is a key to unlocking all sorts of economic opportunities around this solution. We did a study for, well, the folks are here from Europe. And back in 2011, ONAP and the Office of Engineering and Technology at the FCC issued an experimental license for Europe. They promised a friend who went to the Jack Norton School, which was the last school in California on no grid. They had diesel, they had a car battery hooked up to a CB radio, and they weren't on any road system. Promised that we would do something if I ever went back to be a Fed. We issued an experimental license. A company out of Florida, I think it was Florida, came in and said, "Hey, we've got some technology. We've got a radio that we could put on these frequencies," and proved. People in California, Verizon, the big carriers, others, the local carriers are saying, "Well, there's just not a market up those rivers." Yeah, there's some small communities, there are a couple of schools up there, there's a couple, those are old places. They got some fishing camps, but there's really not a market. Now, I think you've hosted the PUC. I think that there are all sorts of companies trying to figure out how they can work with you to get part of this $3 billion. So Spectrum is an incredible, sorry, I'm evangelizing on Spectrum.
Sorry,
Learn it.
I'm just passing the message.
They
down.
know,
Yeah,
and
no
I
worries.
think they have some questions, and I want to make sure that we get a chance to.
Oh, I also have
open it up for
a couple
folks.
gifts to hand out before we break up, but go ahead.
Gifts too.
I do.
Yeah, I want to open it for questions. Monica, you had something?
Yeah, I just was wondering if you could back up a little bit and explain what the policies or laws that created the circumstances where tribes have no access to broadband or very little access to broadband.
Well, one of the big problems was when they built the fiber networks across the United States. They avoided the reservations because, and I said this yesterday, I don't know how many times on the interview, but they were valued on how fast they could build those networks, right? East, west, up, down. And every time they ran into anything, be it the Grand Canyon, the Rocky Mountains, or a tribal reservation, it slowed them down and it screwed up their valuation. So if the tribe wasn't willing to offer an easement straight away, they just went around the tribal border and kept going. So all of the middle mile doesn't go to the reservation unless a tribe was unaware of what the value was and it happened to go through. Typically they can't break into it because it's a long haul network anyway.
So it was
But-
more of the consumers,
But
or
it's the foundational grid that doesn't serve the tribe from the get-go.
Well, and it also goes back even earlier than that when you look at telephone service.
Sure.
So, there was the world back in the day, back in the beginning of time, there was AT&T. There was Ma Bell. Ma Bell was the only game in town. Ma Bell then eventually broke up into 9 baby bells. They were the incumbent carriers. And then you have these big, the FCC calls them price cap carriers. It's just a terminology basically for large carriers, how they're regulated. So you've got, I don't know, today maybe 13 of them. And then you have small rural telephone companies that serve the rural communities that Ma Bell never intended to serve because it was too expensive. And they're the little rate of return carriers. There are about 1,200 of them. The way that the subsidy is very expensive, particularly, we know that most most tribal lands are located in very remote and rural areas. So the high cost program, which was the major subsidy that was created because there had to be an incentive for these providers to serve rural America. Well, there were loopholes. It took me the longest time to figure out, how are they able to avoid serving tribal lands? They're serving different rural communities. Well, because they only had to serve where it was reasonable to do so. And who determined what was reasonable? The carrier. So without a subsidy, you didn't have any carrier wanting to come to provide telephone service. Then you have the same thing happening when fiber networks are being built. And you have the same thing going on today. So, and there wasn't the recognition back in the day. All you had were incumbent carriers. There were no wireless carriers. There were no competitive carriers for a long time.
So it was a lack of regulation?
It was lax regulation.
No, I think it was the intent of the regulations. I think, okay, so you have the problem of the long-haul fiber network not touching Indian country because of the needs for expediency. You therefore have the predicate for the problem of the lack of middle mile. Most of the programs that we've been talking about at the FCC are aimed at what the Fed calls, what we all call last mile, although we're trying to change that lingo in Indian country and call it first mile outside our door. And this paradigm around last mile, it started after the Great Depression. The idea was, okay, communities that can pull themselves up by their bootstraps, we're going to subsidize those. So that's the reason why you have a lot of little bitty carriers in a place like Iowa, because they were able
About
to,
300.
yeah, they were able to create little cooperatives. At that point in time, the Bureau of Indian Affairs was running telephone service. If you look in Title 25 CFR, you will see telephone regulations in the BIA. The BIA was running telephone service on reservations like yours and Felix's and others up north and in certain parts of Indian country. They got
acronym CFR.
Code of Federal Regulations.
Thank you.
Thanks, I owe you one. So so you've got, over time, you've got this paradigm where these incumbents arrive, and it's almost like the landed aristocracy of telecom. You know, who owns the cooperatives? Well, rich local families, local entities, institutions. I mean, in the United States, one of the most powerful parts of our Constitution is the Commerce Clause, people, right? It's competition. And the Telecom Act of 96, the breakup of Ma Bell, the rise of the Telecom Act of 96, that was when the term digital divide was coined. The idea was this act was going to create competition, it was going to drive down prices, it was going to drive connectivity out. Well, that would be wonderful in Indian country if we had the predicate socioeconomic situations to attract competition. And I'm not anti-competitive. I've tried everything in my career. But there are certain places that just are better concept is to get everybody together in a holistic plan. Get the schools and libraries, get the economic development folks, get the law enforcement, get administration and residential.
So Jeff, if I could, I mean, it's not just, so you first you build the infrastructure in a pretty unequal way, but then you need an entire process to hide the fact that that's what you've done.
Yeah.
The Section 706 reports the FCC puts out, they hide. They say, are we doing this in an equitable manner? And if it's a Democratic administration, they say no, but they don't really say what the problems are. If it's a Republican, they say, yeah, we're doing this great. Think about like the Form 477 data that Dustin talked about and how terrible
What
that
is the Form 477?
Yeah, so they do a broadband map of the United States. Where is it? Where is it not? They collect this information self-certified by the ISP. Think about Ajit Pai and how he broke everything potentially good that the Democrats did prior to him. And then he gets to the broadband mapping and he's like, I can't find anything to break more here, so it's good. He didn't change a damn thing, and it was so bad. And one of the things that it was particularly bad about is documenting this, which is to say an independent assessment by the ISP of the ISP would probably say, Indian country is all covered.
Yeah.
And that's why the bad data we've been talking about, and I know we have other questions too.
Yeah, we do.
The bad data that the FCC has been using to make decisions, it just perpetuates that problem. So you keep pouring money into areas that don't necessarily need it and you ignore the areas. I think the time has come, and it's probably long overdue, to stop relying on the federal government to provide the training for their programs. So one program that comes to mind is the E-rate program. A number of years ago, when the program was modernized, the FCC was required to hire tribal liaisons. They hired somebody who was not native and didn't know.
Sorry, that wasn't me. That was the first thing they were required to hire.
CSAP.
Oh yeah, we wrote a
CSAP
rule. Oh
hired
God,
a tribal liaison who was not native and had no tribal experience.
We thought when we said tribal liaison, they would understand that.
Well,
Didn't realize that we had to write.
They now have someone who is native in that position, but is covering all the programs, so it's kind of a daunting.
Overtask.
But and they were supposed to have tribal specific training. Well, I went to one of their tribal specific trainings. I helped to write the rules for the program, so I've kind of been around it for a while. I was lost after the first 5 minutes. I had no idea. They were going so fast. It was like, And then
That
this
is a
feeling,
ringing endorsement.
this overwhelming feeling of, wow, I can't, how do I catch up now? And I'm gonna look like a fool if I say, excuse me, I have no idea where you are and what you're talking about. So they've tried their iteration of, basically their idea of tribal specific training was watered down training. It was the same training at the same pace, but kind of watered down. So the time has come for other entities to come forward and to provide that training and not have to rely on USAC or the FCC to do it, because it's not working. And we need more schools, and now that they have, maybe there'll be an incentive because now tribal libraries are universally eligible, but I wouldn't count on it.
I can see tribes generating libraries just to get access.
Yeah,
When they didn't have one before, now they don't have to
Yeah.
jump through the hoops.
yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
just real quick,
And
that's
that's
what
good.
Yeah.
Navajo Nation did with the chapter houses.
Yeah, they could,
Yeah.
designated them
Yeah,
all
that's
as
right.
libraries. And there's
That's right.
119,
111.
111. Yeah, so there's 111 new libraries.
And that's a work in progress. You gotta continue to evolve that and work it. It's never finished when you, with all those chapter houses. Regs and policy advocacy and getting involved in these different programs is a living, breathing thing. They're constantly working on it.
Yeah.
And on that vein, I wanna make sure that, we're gonna do. The food's not going anywhere. Sorry. We would love to host one of these at Ameren, and we can work in some of this training, but I don't know if you're ready to close out.
I
But
was ready to close
I
out.
bought a gift. It's real easy to bring chili from New Mexico. For those who haven't had red and green chili, it feeds your soul. So a little bit of the red and a little bit of green for our host. Sir. For Matt and Sarah, who came the furthest? Alaska or Hawaii? Somebody.
Point out that, make a comment about Linnea's strategy about holding BIA feet to the fire and pushing them, which was exactly what you guys had been talking about earlier. And I think that's.
No, it's not, it is very close.
No.
You all got a survey. Love to beat yesterday's numbers, okay? So I'm not